Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to video number 2 in the series of reading this book by Dr. Ahmad Bassam Saeh called The Miraculous Language of the Qur'an, Evidence of Divine Origin. And inshallah, we are going to continue with the reading of the book, and we're going to go through some of the arguments that Dr. makes in his introduction. So let's begin in the name of Allah. Now, inshallah, I'm going to keep this very short, and I'm going to break it into shorter clips, inshallah, because the feedback I got from the previous video was that, sir, if you want to make it really easy for us, 40 minutes is like too long, and so, keep it short and sweet. So, inshallah, we're going to break this further and going to deal with many things one by one, but in different sections in different videos. So in the introduction, he begins by saying, it all began in 1989. It all began in 1989, and when the Oxford Center for Islamic Studies asked me to present a number of lectures to British students seeking a better understanding of the Arabic language through the Holy Qur'an. After trying to translate the meaning of the Qur'an into English for my students, I found myself drawn by their challenging questions beyond the boundaries of the linguistic traditions and conventions familiar to the interpreters and linguists. At the time, I just happened to be editing a book written in the Andalusian period with a British Orientalist and friend at Oxford University's The Oriental Institute. One day, my friend asked me, which is the correct in Arabic, ma zala or la zala? Without giving it much thought, I replied, ma zala. And this is usually how the Arabs speak, ma zala. After some discussion, however, he insisted that la zala was correct, while I insisted on ma zala. In the end, he surprised me by saying, well, then either you are mistaken or God is. After all, the Qur'an only uses la zala. So first of all, let's understand where he's beginning from, where Dr. Ahmad Bassam Saeh is beginning from. He's right away jumping into how he came to the path of this research. And at very early in his telling of his story, we see how he forms his thought and how he's telling us which were the factors that brought him to this investigation into this forte of linguistics, hence to prove that the Qur'an's language is miraculous and of divine origin. And the first incident that he talks about is actually very important. Right away, it tells you that the language of the Qur'an is unlike the language of human beings. Unlike the language of human beings. And this is elaborated further when he goes into details about la zala and ma zala. So stay with me. He continues, for a moment I was speechless because his Orientalist friend has just accused him of lying, of being mistaken, because he is referring to the Quranic usage of the word as in la zala. The Quran uses la zala, whereas the human beings, the normal locution, the normal style, the normal jargon of Arabs is using it as ma zala. So he says, for a moment I was speechless. Then I gathered my wits and asked him in return, so how would you translate the verb kana fil mad, kana, into English? How would you use that verb? How would you translate that verb in English? For the non-Arabs, for the ones who don't speak or understand Arabic, was is the was is the translation of the word kana. Kana, was. For example, we say in Arabic, what would be a good example? Kuntu atawakka'u. Kuntu is a form of kana. Int kunt fain. Fain kunt int. Fain kunta inta. For example, in slang, in Arabic, Ammiya, in Saudiya, this is specific to Jeddah. This is Jeddawi, Ammiya. The Makkawiyin, they don't say it like this. But the Jeddawi Ammiya, a person living in Jeddah, if somebody would come late to job, for example, somewhere that he or she was supposed to be and he or she is late, they would ask, Anta or Anti kunt fain. Where were you? Where were you? Fain kan al fulus. For example, in a business deal, you're saying to somebody who was supposed to bring money, and he's saying, I don't have money because money was somewhere else. Where was the money? Fain kan fulus. Kan. Where was it? Where were you? Int kunt fain. So this is the word kana. It is used specifically for the past, for the mad, for the past. So he's saying, how would you translate the verb kana into English? Was. He replied without hesitation. Was. If that's the case, I continued, then how would you translate the following phrase from the Qur'an? وَكَانَ اللَّهُ غَفُورًا رَحِيمًا. Pay attention. It begins kana. وَكَانَ اللَّهُ. And if you translate into English, word for word, it should be, and was Allah, and Allah was. Ghafoor and Rahim. وَكَانَ اللَّهُ غَفُورًا رَحِيمًا. If it were human language, you would translate it simply as saying, Allah was Ghafoor and Rahim. But no. Everyone understands it, and this is the fun part. This is what he means when he says, the Qur'an did not bring a new language. But the I'jaz, because understand this as well. I want to talk about two things here briefly. And so please lend me your ears for a moment. Please stay with me and pay attention. Number one, when we talk about newness of a language, we are talking about the language itself. When we say new language, it does not mean in the signifier part of the language, signifier, the symbolic, the words, the words that you can read or the words that you can speak. In that dimension of the language that it's new. No. We are primarily talking about the signified side, the idea side, the tasawwurat that it is linked to. When we say it is a new language, that is what is usually meant by the word new language, by the term new language. That is what is usually meant. And I will elaborate on that. Don't worry about it. Just trying to make you understand, if Dr. Ahmad Bassam Saeh is saying that the Qur'an brought a new language, it does not mean it was any other language than Arabic. It was Arabic, but it was new in its expression, in its formation, in its framing of the idioms, in its phrasal verbs, in its tarakib, so on and so forth. And we'll get into that, inshallah. Number one. Number two, the expressions that are divine, that is Allah's kalam, are nonetheless perfectly understood and understandable by the human beings of the time it was revealed into, by the human beings that it was revealed into. Because if it were revealed into in a slang of a subgroup, a specific slang of a specific subgroup, or a kind of a language that was foreign to the Arabs and they couldn't understand it, then it wouldn't have been a miracle. They couldn't understand it. It's foreign to them. What's the miraculousness? The miracle of the language lies in the fact that the Arabs understood it and they were astonished by it. When Allah says, وَكَانَ اللَّهُ غَفُورًا رَحِيمًا, no one in our tradition understands it as, and Allah was Ghafoor and Rahim. Everyone understood it perfectly. Everyone understands that it means Allah is and will be. Allah was, Allah is, and will always be Ghafoor and Rahim. Please pay attention. Are you getting what I'm saying? Everybody understands it. And we are stunned and astonished. You cannot be astonished unless you understand it. And then you are astonished. Oh my God. I mean, look at it. What a beauty. What an expression. Subhanallah. In my language, for example, when you read Ghalib's poetry, and well, there are theories that he stole it from Bedal, one of his teachers. A lot of expressions that he has in his Urdu Divan are stolen directly from the Divan of Bedal. But irrespective of that, if you read Ghalib, you are astonished. You are astonished. And the other day I was reading Sharh Ghalib by Nazm Tabatabai, Allama Tabatabai, great Ghalib scholar. And he was making a point saying that normally in his day and age and in our day and age, which is even further from days of Ghalib, we say that his poetry, his poetic language is difficult. Whereas it was perfectly understood as all the idioms that he uses were part of the lingua franca of that era of Delhi, the Delhi of that era and the Lucknow of that era. Everybody understood it. Juz qiyas na koi aur aya baruए कार, सहरा मगर बतंगी चश्म हसूद था ख्वाब में ख्याल को तुझसे मामला जब आँख खुली न ज़या था न सूद था और तेशे बगैर कोहकन भी मर ना सका असद सरगुश्ता खुमारे रसूमों क़यूद था. If in today's academics or in today's let's say school, a teacher narrates this, reads this poetry to his or her students, they will be astonished. What is this? We don't understand it. But at that point in time, it was understood perfectly, and that is why people around Ghalib were astonished. How is this guy doing such a good poetry? दोस्त गम खारी में मेरी साई फरमावेंगे क्या, दोस्त गम खारी में मेरी साई फरमावेंगे क्या, जख्म के भरने तलक नाखुन न बढ़ावेंगे क्या. What an expression. What an expression. The ones who understand Urdu would understand it. Or in English, for example, nowadays we say that Shakespearean language is very difficult to understand. You think it was difficult to understand for Queen Elizabeth for that matter? Or the aristocratic class of that era? No, it wasn't even difficult to understand for the middle and lower middle classes of that age. The Globe Theatre, the theatre that Shakespeare built, used to be filled, and most of the seats, in fact, they did not have seats. The lower middle class people were not able to sit while watching those plays. But most of the space was filled by these lower middle class people. And they understood the expressions like put out the light and then put out the light. To be or not to be, that is the question. I am but mad northwest. When the wind is southerly, I can tell a hawk from a handsaw. You read this today and you're like, man, I can't understand a word. I can't understand a word, Shakespeare says. But at that time, was that difficult to understand? No. If it would have been difficult to understand, Shakespeare would not have been Shakespeare. Ghalib would not have been Ghalib. If Ghalib wasn't understood by his peers, who would have praised him? Who would have said, till today that he's one of the greatest, or probably, in fact, the greatest Urdu poet that we have? Or Shakespeare is the greatest poet, the greatest dramatist that we have in English. Who would have said that? People are aware of the rivalry between Marlowe and Shakespeare. I'm going into literature because, this is the subject. So try to understand this, and try to understand this well. This language was perfectly understood by the Arabs of that time, and that's why they were astonished by it. I will, inshallah, come to one of the incidents that in volume 1 of his original Arabic work, Dr. Ahmad Bassam Saeh tells us about. The story of Utbah. Inshallah, I'll come to that. Maybe in the next video or the video after. So anyways, and God is oft forgiving. What is understood from this expression? وَكَانَ اللَّهُ غَفُورًا رَحِيمًا. And God is oft forgiving, most merciful. He replied as confidently as before, where is the verb kana in this translation? I asked. I wanted to know. But he could not answer me, since the only verb one can use to translate this statement is, not was. The translation of the word kana, in this frame, وَكَانَ اللَّهُ غَفُورًا رَحِيمًا, the translation of kana is. Allah was, Allah is, and will always be Ghafura Rahima, which would be equivalent to yakunu or inna Allah Ghafura Rahima. The translation of Khan Allah Ghafura Rahima, the way you understand it, the way the Arabs understood it, is similar to inna Allah Ghafura Rahima. Yakunu, would not be a fusha expression here, but inna perfectly makes sense. Inna Allah Ghafura Rahim. But not the past tense verbal from kana. Kana cannot be translated in human language as is, right? So let me stop here and let me depart from you by leaving you with this thought alone. Just think about it. وَكَانَ اللَّهُ غَفُورًا رَحِيمًا. This is one of the clear-cut, most simplest examples that anyone can give you, and Dr. Ahmad Bassam Saeh does an excellent job of beginning his book by this example. I think he's done a marvelous job. وَكَانَ اللَّهُ غَفُورًا رَحِيمًا. And then we'll come to La Yazala and Ma Yazalu. That's, inshallah, the topic of the next video. Right? So, please look at this book. I urge you to pick it up. Inshallah, it would be one of the best investments that you have made all your life. Discuss this with your parents if you're young. Discuss it with your progeny, with your son, daughter, if you are old and you have kids. Tell them what is the miracle of the Qur'an in practical, academic, empirical terms. Tell them, teach them. علموا أولادكم محبة قرآن وعلموا أولادكم محبة رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم. علموا أولادكم. Teach them these things. Inshallah, be good. Take care of yourselves, your parents, your progeny, everyone around you, in your town, in your city, in your country, and in your world. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.